They were untouchable, the kings and queens of the silver screen, faces that sold out theaters and commanded millions in the era when Hollywood ruled the world. But behind the perfectly polished studio press releases and hand-picked magazine covers were secrets so destructive they didn't just shatter marriages. They wrecked careers, reputations, and entire legacies. From Elizabeth Taylor's infamous betrayal of her best friend to Ingrid Bergman's affair so scandalous she was publicly denounced on the floor of the U.S. Senate, today we're peeling back the golden curtain of old Hollywood to reveal 17 shocking celebrity affairs that didn't just ruin marriages, they ruined everything. Part 1. Elizabeth Taylor and Eddie Fisher, the betrayal that ended America's sweetheart era. In the 1950s, Elizabeth Taylor wasn't just a movie star. She was Hollywood royalty. Breathtakingly beautiful, impossibly glamorous, and already an Oscar-nominated actress before she turned 25. But it wasn't just her talent that mesmerized the public. It was her image. Carefully crafted, delicately preserved, the grieving widow, the loyal friend, the symbol of post-war feminine grace. That image exploded into dust in 1958. Eddie Fisher, the squeaky clean crooner with the golden voice, was married to Debbie Reynolds, America's sweetheart, girl next door, and Taylor's close friend. The Reynolds-Fisher marriage was the ideal Hollywood union. They were young, wildly popular, and constantly photographed. A dream couple in a dream town. But after the sudden death of Elizabeth's third husband, Mike Todd, in a plane crash, things took a sharp and very public turn. Eddie Fisher rushed to comfort the grieving Elizabeth. But comfort quickly turned into something else. Rumors began to swirl. Whispers turned into tabloid headlines. And when Fisher divorced Reynolds to marry Taylor in 1959, the backlash was instant and brutal. The public was outraged. Fan mail turned venomous. Debbie Reynolds, humiliated but poised, remained America's darling. But Elizabeth? She was vilified. The fallout was swift. Sponsors pulled out of Fisher's variety show. His music career plummeted. He was no longer the wholesome figure audiences adored. He was the man who betrayed Debbie Reynolds for her glamorous best friend. His TV career never recovered. Elizabeth, though still a box office draw, became a magnet for scandal. Roles grew fewer. Interviews became defensive. The press painted her not as a grieving widow, but as a husband-stealing siren. It would take her winning an Oscar for Butterfield 8, a role she hated, to begin clawing back some professional respect. But the stain remained. The affair cost Eddie Fisher everything, and Elizabeth Taylor would carry the homewrecker label for the rest of her life. In the span of a year, 2 Hollywood marriages died, and with them, 2 careers were changed forever. Part 2. Ingrid Bergman and Roberto Rossellini, the affair that got her exiled from Hollywood. Ingrid Bergman was once considered the epitome of dignity and moral virtue on screen. With her luminous beauty and soft-spoken intensity, she was beloved by audiences for roles in films like Casablanca and Gaslight. But the woman who played saints and self-sacrificing wives would soon find herself condemned as a sinner, not in film, but in real life. It all started in 1949, when Bergman wrote a fan letter to Italian director Roberto Rossellini, praising his film Rome, Open City. The letter sparked a correspondence, and soon an invitation. Come to Italy. Make a movie. Bergman accepted. She left her husband and daughter behind in the U.S. and traveled to Rome, ostensibly for work. But what followed was a media firestorm of epic proportions. While still married, Bergman began an affair with Rossellini. And it wasn't just whispered about, it was seen. Paparazzi caught glimpses, crew members leaked details. And then came the breaking point. Ingrid Bergman was pregnant with Rossellini's child. When the news hit the American press in early 1950, Hollywood exploded. Studio heads were blindsided. Fan clubs dissolved overnight. Religious groups protested in the streets. U.S. Senator Edwin C. Johnson even took to the Senate floor to denounce her as a powerful influence for evil. Yes, on record, in Congress. Bergman was labeled a fallen woman, a pariah. Her films were boycotted. Studios refused to cast her. She was effectively exiled from Hollywood. Rossellini and Bergman did marry, and she gave birth to their son. But the cost was immense. For nearly a decade, she was shut out of the American film industry. Her name, once synonymous with grace, had become a warning. By the time she returned in 1956 to star in Anastasia, and eventually win her second Academy Award, the damage had been done. Bergman had to rebuild her image from scratch, and even then, the stain of the scandal never completely disappeared. The affair may have given her love and a new artistic path in European cinema, but it destroyed her pristine American career. She was no longer the angelic heroine. She was the woman who'd thrown away a family, a country, and a reputation, all for passion. Part 3. Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, a lifelong affair that froze his career in shadows. It was one of the greatest love stories in Hollywood, but also one of its most suffocating secrets. Spencer Tracy was a titan of the screen. Revered for his naturalistic acting and fierce moral presence, he won back-to-back Oscars and commanded deep respect from peers and audiences alike. But behind his commanding performances was a man crushed by contradictions. Tracy was a devout Catholic and a married one. Though his relationship with his wife Louise had long been estranged, he never divorced her. Divorce to him was a sin. So instead, he remained married in name and began a decades-long love affair with Katharine Hepburn. Hepburn, bold, brilliant, and unapologetically independent, was his opposite in many ways. Yet for 26 years, she stood by him. But not publicly. Their relationship was invisible by design. No red carpet appearances, no shared interviews, no on-set declarations, and the silence cost them both. For Tracy, the affair trapped him in a spiritual crisis that deepened his alcoholism and depression. Studios grew wary of his volatility. He began turning down major roles. His health deteriorated. And in an industry that sold image as much as talent, his double life eroded the very foundation of his stardom. He refused to leave his wife, yet lived with Hepburn in secret. And when directors or producers pushed back, he disappeared, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months. The pressure to maintain the facade, saintly husband, romantic lead, and faithful Catholic, drained him. Katharine Hepburn's career weathered the storm better, but even she admitted, "I lived for him. I watched his health collapse. I waited. I gave up a lot." Her fierce independence was curiously muted in his presence. Roles that might have showcased her dominance were passed over to keep their working partnership afloat. When Tracy died in 1967, just weeks after finishing Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Hepburn did not attend the funeral, out of respect for his wife. Theirs was not a scandal in the tabloids. It was a slow erosion, a career muted by a love that couldn't speak its name. Tracy might have gone down in history as one of the most honored actors of his time, but behind the prestige was a legacy smothered in guilt, secrecy, and self-destruction. And in the end, the affair that sustained him emotionally also strangled his career from the inside. Part 4. Joan Crawford and Clark Gable, a forbidden passion that poisoned both their images. She was the studio's ultimate femme fatale. He was the king of Hollywood. Together, Joan Crawford and Clark Gable were combustible, not only on screen, but off it. Their chemistry was undeniable. From the moment they met at MGM in the early 1930s, the sexual tension between them was the stuff of legend. But there was one major problem. Both were married to other people, and MGM was terrified of what that meant for their public image. Louis B. Mayer, the studio's fearsome head, had invested millions in crafting Clark Gable as the rugged yet honorable leading man, and Joan Crawford as the glamorous yet respectable diva. Their affair, if made public, would have annihilated everything. So what did MGM do? They separated them. Whenever rumors flared, the studio shipped one or both stars off to distant film sets. Mayer personally forbade directors from casting them together too often. But the affair never truly ended. It simmered behind the scenes for over a decade, messy, obsessive, and filled with jealousy. Insiders whispered that Crawford became possessive and manipulative, even while married to others. Gable, meanwhile, would disappear into alcohol-fueled binges after their encounters. He reportedly felt torn, fascinated by her intensity, yet repelled by the threat she posed to his career. And it did damage his career. While Gable remained a box office force, his roles began to suffer. His off-screen antics and emotional instability grew harder to ignore. His carefully crafted image as the noble Rhett Butler type was undermined by reports of affairs, fights, and emotional volatility. And much of it stemmed from his toxic bond with Crawford. For Joan Crawford, the toll was equally corrosive. The affair fed into her growing reputation as unstable and predatory. Critics began to view her not as a gifted actress, but as a manipulator, a star who used seduction to maintain power. By the late 40s, her contracts dried up, and her reputation as box office poison began to stick. Though they never publicly acknowledged their relationship, its effects haunted them both. Crawford allegedly kept a painting of Gable in her bedroom until her death. Gable once said, offhandedly, "Joan would have eaten me alive if I'd let her." Theirs was a love that never fully happened, and a scandal that never fully erupted. But in the shadows of Golden Age Hollywood, their affair did exactly what the studios feared. It stained two legacies beyond repair. Part 5. Loretta Young and Clark Gable, the secret child that nearly ended her career. By the late 1930s, Loretta Young had crafted a pristine image, elegant, devoutly Catholic, and morally untouchable. She was the embodiment of virtue, on screen and off. But behind the studio gloss lay a secret so damaging, it could have ended her career and destroyed her life had it come to light. It began during the filming of Call of the Wild, 1935, where she starred opposite Clark Gable. Gable, married at the time and infamous for his affairs, reportedly took a strong interest in Young, and that interest crossed a line. Young would later describe what happened not as an affair, but as coercion, though she never publicly used that language. What's undeniable is this: she became pregnant. In 1935, an unmarried pregnancy in Hollywood wasn't just scandalous, it was career-ending. Studio contracts had morality clauses. If word got out, she would be branded immoral, dropped by studios, and blacklisted from roles. And for Gable, almost nothing. He denied paternity and went on with his career unscathed. So Young did what many women in her position were forced to do. She hid. She vanished from public life for months under the pretense of illness, gave birth to a daughter, Judy, in secret, and placed the baby in an orphanage. A year later, she quietly adopted her own child, a tactic used to preserve her reputation. But the whispers never stopped. Judy bore a striking resemblance to Gable, down to his prominent ears and dimples. As she grew, even family friends suspected the truth. Still, Loretta Young kept silent to protect her image, her daughter, and her career. And she paid the price. The emotional toll of secrecy weighed heavily on her. Though she continued acting and even won an Oscar in 1948 for The Farmer's Daughter, she became increasingly withdrawn, known for her rigidity and obsession with morality on set, likely a defense mechanism for the lie she lived. It wasn't until after her death that the full truth came out. In 2015, her daughter Judy revealed that Young had finally admitted the child was Gable's, and that what had occurred between them may not have been consensual. For Loretta Young, the affair wasn't just a personal trauma. It forced her into a lifetime performance more painful than anything she ever did on camera. It nearly ruined her. And it permanently damaged how she was viewed by those who discovered the truth later. Clark Gable, on the other hand, never acknowledged the child, nor faced any real professional consequences. Once again, the burden of the scandal fell hardest on the woman, and her career, though long, was built on the quiet wreckage of a truth too dangerous to be spoken. Part 6. Errol Flynn, the teenage scandals that ended his leading man era. In the late 1930s and early 40s, Errol Flynn was the undisputed king of action and adventure. With his devilish charm, athletic build, and piercing eyes, he dazzled audiences in films like Captain Blood, The Adventures of Robin Hood, and The Seahawk. He was the ultimate heroic figure, courageous, loyal, dashing. But off-screen, Flynn was anything but heroic. His affairs weren't just prolific, they were dangerous. Flynn was infamous in Hollywood circles for his wild lifestyle, alcohol, drugs, and a revolving door of romantic entanglements. But in 1942, the rumors took a sharp and catastrophic turn when he was charged with statutory rape of 2 underage girls, both just 17. The trial was a media spectacle. Studios scrambled to distance themselves. Fans were shocked. And while Flynn had always projected a rakish persona, this went far beyond mere gossip. The courtroom drama dragged on for weeks. Graphic testimony made front-page news. Flynn's lawyers painted the girls as manipulative, while the girls' stories painted a chilling portrait of a predator behind the charm. Though he was ultimately acquitted, the damage was irreversible. His once golden reputation was permanently tainted. The phrase, "in like Flynn," once meant to celebrate his supposed romantic prowess, took on a much more sinister undertone. While he continued to work after the trial, the roles changed. He was no longer the beloved hero. Studios cast him in darker, more cynical parts. The sparkle was gone, and so was the trust. His drinking worsened. He became unreliable on set, and his body began to break down under the weight of substance abuse. Directors complained of slurred speech, erratic behavior, and fits of rage. His appeal faded fast, and by the end of the 1940s, he was no longer bankable. The affairs didn't stop. Flynn's relationships grew increasingly disturbing. A pattern of pursuing younger and younger women continued, often with heavy coercion. And though Hollywood looked the other way, the public didn't. Audiences began avoiding his films, even as studios kept releasing them. By the early 1950s, Flynn was a ghost of his former self. He fled Hollywood, moving to Europe, where his final years were spent in financial ruin, physical decay, and tabloid disgrace. Errol Flynn's downfall wasn't caused by just one affair. It was the cumulative weight of many, culminating in a scandal so explosive it burned down everything he built. He died at 50, but his career died long before that. In the end, it wasn't a sword that killed the swashbuckler. It was the very appetites he could never control. Part 7. Bette Davis and William Wyler, the affair that cost her the role of a lifetime. Bette Davis was never afraid to break the rules. She fought studios, sued Warner Bros. For creative freedom, and delivered some of the most explosive performances of the 20th century. But what many don't know is how one of her most emotionally charged affairs, with director William Wyler, led to heartbreak, regret, and the loss of the role that could have changed everything. The year was 1938, and Davis was filming Jezebel, a role that would earn her her second Academy Award. At the helm was William Wyler, one of the most respected and demanding directors of the time. The two clashed constantly on set, and the tension soon spilled into passion. Their affair began in secret but was intense, volatile, and in Davis's words, the most exciting relationship I ever had. But it wasn't built to last. Wyler was married, and though Davis hoped he'd leave his wife, he never did. The emotional toll on her was immense. What started as a creative partnership, Wyler coaxed some of her finest performances, soon devolved into longing, jealousy, and resentment. When casting began for Gone with the Wind in 1938, Bette Davis was a natural contender. She had the fire, the reputation, and the audience support. And Wyler, a possible director for the film at one point, could have helped shape her into the perfect Scarlett O'Hara. But the affair had left scars. Davis was emotionally raw, and Wyler, now distant, no longer championed her the way he once had. The industry buzzed with rumors of her instability and romantic entanglements. David O. Selznick, wary of off-screen drama, passed her over, ultimately casting Vivien Leigh. To lose Gone with the Wind was devastating for Davis. Though she would go on to star in acclaimed films like Now Voyager and All About Eve, she never forgot the role that got away, and the affair she believed cost her everything. Later in life, Davis reflected, "He was the love of my life, but I gave more than I got." The fallout wasn't just personal, it was deeply professional. After the affair ended, Wyler worked with other actresses, including Audrey Hepburn and Olivia de Havilland, while Davis found herself increasingly typecast and by the 1950s edged out by younger stars. The most biting irony? Jezebel, the film that started it all, was seen by many as Davis's consolation prize for losing Scarlett O'Hara. But no prize could fill the void the affair left behind. In a town where women were punished for passion and men walked away clean, Bette Davis paid the price, with her heart and perhaps with the role of a lifetime. Part 8. Lana Turner and Johnny Stompanato, a dangerous affair that turned deadly. Lana Turner was the ultimate Hollywood siren, the platinum blonde with curves to kill and a voice like velvet. Rising to fame in the 1940s with hits like The Postman Always Rings Twice, she became the archetype of the femme fatale, on screen and, all too often, off it. But nothing in her carefully polished career could prepare her for the scandal that would define her legacy, or the man who would nearly destroy her. In 1957, Turner began dating Johnny Stompanato, a former Marine turned bodyguard and enforcer for notorious mobster Mickey Cohen. To Lana, he was charming, dangerous, and attentive. But beneath the surface, Stompanato was controlling, violent, and unpredictable. Friends warned her. Studios were nervous. But Lana, desperate for affection and drawn to danger, stayed. What followed was a nightmare. Stampanato's jealousy turned into obsession. He allegedly stalked her on set, threatened co-stars, and once even showed up uninvited during filming in England, brandishing a weapon. Lana tried to end it multiple times. But each time, he came back with roses, apologies, and veiled threats. The breaking point came on April 4th, 1958. An argument erupted between the two inside Turner's Beverly Hills home. Her 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl Crane, overheard the fight, the screaming, the threats, and in a moment of panic, burst into the room holding a kitchen knife. In the chaos that followed, she stabbed Stampanato in the stomach. He died on the spot. The press descended like vultures. The coroner's inquest was front-page news for weeks. Turner, weeping on the stand, testified that her daughter acted to protect her. The jury ruled the death justifiable homicide. Cheryl was never charged. But the damage was done. Though Turner avoided legal consequences, her career never fully recovered. Studios were terrified of the baggage. She was seen as toxic, not only for her proximity to organized crime, but for the sheer scandal of a child killing her abusive lover. Roles dried up. Endorsements vanished. Even her attempted comeback in Peyton Place, which earned her an Oscar nomination, couldn't shake the association with violence, chaos, and moral ambiguity. The public, once enchanted by her glamour, now saw her as dangerous, broken, and possibly complicit in a tragedy that played out like pulp noir. For the rest of her life, Lana Turner tried to regain control of her story. But no matter what roles she played, she would always be the woman in the headlines, the Hollywood goddess whose affair ended not in heartbreak, but in blood. Part 9, Ava Gardner and Frank Sinatra, the affair that dismantled his career and nearly ended hers. She was sultry, wild, and untamable. He was intense, volatile, and madly in love. Together, Ava Gardner and Frank Sinatra created one of Hollywood's most toxic love stories, one that left destruction in its wake and dragged both stars into professional chaos. When they met in the late 1940s, Ava Gardner was on the cusp of superstardom. Her beauty was legendary, but she was also a rising talent with critical momentum. Sinatra, on the other hand, was already a household name, the golden voice of the war years, adored by millions. But his star was fading. His marriage to Nancy Sinatra was unraveling. His film roles were drying up, and his affair with Gardner only accelerated his fall from grace. Their relationship began while Sinatra was still married. Ava made no secret of it, and neither did the press. The public, especially women who had idolized Sinatra as the loyal family man, turned on him almost overnight. Headlines accused Gardner of being a homewrecker. Sinatra was vilified for abandoning his wife and children. When he finally divorced Nancy in 1951 and married Ava, the backlash was immediate and brutal. Sinatra's record sales plummeted. Studios refused to cast him. He went from America's sweetheart to a washed-up crooner in a scandalous marriage. At one point, he was dropped by his agent, fired by his label, and left without a contract. He was so broke that Ava reportedly had to pay his hotel bills and buy his clothes. For Gardner, the marriage was equally destructive. The couple fought violently. Shouting matches, broken furniture, and police visits became routine. The emotional toll was staggering. Gardner began drinking heavily. Her reputation as difficult and unpredictable on set grew. Directors were wary. Studios began seeing her more as a liability than a leading lady. And yet, they couldn't quit each other. Despite the chaos, they loved with a fire that refused to die, but it burned them both. Gardner later said, "He was good in the feathers but bad on everything else." Their arguments were legendary. Once, in a fit of rage, Gardner threw an entire champagne bottle at Sinatra's head. Another time, he tried to overdose on sleeping pills after one of their explosive fights. Professionally, both suffered. Gardner's roles became less frequent, and she retreated from the Hollywood spotlight. Sinatra, desperate for redemption, fought tooth and nail to land the role of Maggio in From Here to Eternity. It saved his career, earning him an Oscar and jump-starting a second act. But even then, he never truly recovered from the toll of the Gardner years. They divorced in 1957, but Sinatra never stopped loving her. He sent flowers to her until the day she died. Their affair didn't just ruin a marriage, it dragged down two empires. Gardner's fire dimmed. Sinatra nearly disappeared. And their love became a cautionary tale. Passion might be good for the screen, but in real life, it can incinerate everything in its path. Part 10, Mickey Rooney, the affairs that turned America's boy wonder into a tabloid punchline. In the late 1930s, no star in Hollywood shone brighter than Mickey Rooney. With his all-American charm and boundless energy, Rooney starred in the Andy Hardy series, wholesome family films that catapulted him into superstardom. At one point, he was the #1 box office draw in the world, even beating out Clark Gable. But behind the boyish smile was a man consumed by ego, impulse, and a self-destructive addiction to women. Rooney's love life was a train wreck in slow motion. He married 8 times, and almost all of those marriages were tainted by infidelity, lies, and public humiliation. His first wife was none other than Ava Gardner. At the time, she was an unknown teenager, and he was at the height of his fame. The studio approved of the union, briefly, but when word of Rooney's constant cheating reached the press, the marriage collapsed after just a year. And that was only the beginning. As Rooney's star continued to rise, so did the headlines about his off-screen affairs. He had relationships with showgirls, starlets, and secretaries, anyone who crossed his path. The more his personal life spiraled, the more the public began to question whether he was really the boy next door or something far darker. Studios grew concerned. His image, once squeaky clean, became tarnished by scandal. The post-war audience, craving more mature, refined heroes, began to turn away from the tabloid circus that followed Rooney everywhere he went. His roles became fewer. He was passed over for major films because producers didn't want the baggage. And his own behavior made things worse. On set, he became erratic and combative. He burned bridges with directors, insulted co-stars, and showed up late, or not at all. As his fame declined, Rooney leaned into the chaos, becoming a permanent fixture in the gossip columns, but an afterthought in casting offices. By the 1950s, his career had crashed. The boy wonder of MGM was now a washed-up headline, mocked more for his failed marriages and endless affairs than for his early talent. Even comeback attempts were hampered by his inability to separate his personal scandals from his professional obligations. Rooney once admitted, "I lost a lot of jobs because I couldn't keep my zipper up." It wasn't just a lack of discipline. It was an addiction to drama, to the thrill of conquest, and to the illusion that stardom would shield him from consequence. In the end, Mickey Rooney went from being Hollywood's most beloved teen idol to a cautionary tale of what happens when fame collides with unchecked vice. The women came and went. The marriages ended in courtrooms. But the damage to his legacy? Part 11, Judy Garland and Artie Shaw, the affair that shattered her confidence and sparked a downward spiral. By the time she was 17, Judy Garland was already a household name. Her role in The Wizard of Oz had immortalized her as America's girl next door with a voice that could break hearts. But behind her innocent screen persona was a young girl desperately starved for affection, validation, and love. Enter Artie Shaw, the jazz sensation and clarinet virtuoso, who was nearly a decade older and carried himself with intellectual swagger. At the time, he was one of the most sought-after musicians in the country. Garland, in the throes of adolescence and self-doubt, was instantly smitten. What began as an infatuation quickly spiraled into a painful humiliation. Judy believed they were in love. She told friends she thought they might marry. MGM, always micromanaging her image, tried to keep the affair quiet. But before Garland could even make sense of where the relationship was going, Artie Shaw abruptly left her. Not just for anyone, but for her best friend, actress Lana Turner. Within weeks, Shaw had eloped with Turner in a shocking tabloid whirlwind. Garland was blindsided. The betrayal devastated her. She reportedly locked herself in her dressing room for days. Co-stars later described her as inconsolable, crying between takes, chain-smoking, her fragile confidence shattered. And this wasn't just personal, it was professional. MGM was already forcing Judy to take pep pills to keep her energy up and downers to help her sleep. But after the Shaw incident, her emotional volatility worsened. She became more dependent on the pills. Her weight fluctuated wildly, a constant concern for studio heads obsessed with keeping her camera ready. Her mental health teetered on the edge. Directors began complaining. She was late to rehearsals, increasingly anxious, and painfully insecure. Her once effervescent energy was dimming. And it all traced back to those early heartbreaks that taught her she was never enough. Not pretty enough, not thin enough, not lovable enough. The Shaw-Turner affair marked a brutal turning point. While Lana Turner's career skyrocketed and Artie Shaw moved on to other famous wives, Judy Garland began a slow descent. One marked by failed relationships, breakdowns, hospitalizations, and studios that profited off her pain while never once offering her protection. In later interviews, Garland rarely spoke about Shaw, but those close to her insisted. It wasn't just a teenage crush. It was the first betrayal in a lifetime of them. And it set a precedent she could never quite escape. Judy Garland would go on to become one of the greatest performers of her generation. But the affair with Artie Shaw, brief, cruel, and humiliating, was one of the earliest emotional wounds that would never fully heal. A career wasn't lost overnight, but a girl's innocence was. And from that moment on, she would sing with a heartbreak the world could feel, but never fully understand. Part 12. Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller. The marriage that derailed her stardom. By the mid-1950s, Marilyn Monroe was more than a movie star. She was a global phenomenon. The sex symbol of her era, Monroe had crafted an image so alluring that it eclipsed everything else about her. Her intelligence, her sensitivity, and her desperate desire to be taken seriously as an actress. So when she married Arthur Miller, the Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright of Death of a Salesman, it shocked the world. Here was the bombshell pinup marrying the intellectual titan of American letters. Hollywood didn't know what to make of it. Miller's East Coast literary circle sneered at Monroe's breathy voice and glamour. Monroe's Hollywood peers whispered that she was overreaching, playing a role far beyond her depth. But for Marilyn, Miller represented everything she craved: stability, validation, and most of all, respect. She wanted to be seen as more than a sex object. She wanted to be a serious actress, and she believed Arthur Miller could help her become one. Instead, the marriage exposed her fragility and ultimately helped collapse her career. From the beginning, the union was strained. Monroe felt isolated from Miller's world. He, in turn, began to view her less as a muse and more as a burden. Her emotional volatility, dependence on pills, and frequent insecurities clashed with his stoic intellectualism. Things worsened when Monroe read one of Miller's private notebooks and discovered he had written that he was embarrassed by her, that she humiliated him in front of his friends. The revelation shattered her. On set, she became erratic. During the filming of The Misfits, a script Miller wrote for her, Monroe was frequently late, heavily medicated, and deeply depressed. The marriage was unraveling in real time, and the crew watched helplessly as the once vibrant star dissolved before their eyes. Their public image, once that of a glamorous couple bridging art and cinema, became a cautionary tale. The press called them mismatched. Studios distanced themselves from her. Directors hesitated to cast her, afraid she'd be more trouble than triumph. After their divorce in 1961, Monroe's career never fully recovered. She would make only one more completed film. Her public appearances grew more erratic, her dependency on drugs intensified, and her loneliness deepened. Arthur Miller moved on, remarrying and continuing to write. But for Marilyn, the damage lingered. The man who was supposed to help her transform into a serious artist instead left her more insecure, more broken, and more lost than ever before. Her dream of respectability died in that marriage. And with it, the spark that made Marilyn Monroe more than just a beautiful face. Within a year of their split, she was dead. Some say it was the price of fame, but others know better. It was the price of seeking love from someone who saw through her, but never truly saw her. At Part 13, Charlie Chaplin and Una O'Neill, the affair that ended his American career. Charlie Chaplin was more than a movie star. He was a symbol. As the little tramp, he captured the heart of America with his pathos, humor, and silent grace. He built United Artists. He helped shape the entire grammar of cinema. But by the 1940s, his off-screen life had become more scandalous than any of his films, and one affair, in particular, would ensure he'd never work in America again. Una O'Neill was 18 years old, barely out of boarding school, and the daughter of famed playwright Eugene O'Neill. Chaplin was 54. The age difference alone sparked shockwaves through Hollywood. But what began as flirtation quickly turned into something far more serious. In 1943, they married, a decision that enraged Una's father so much that he disowned her for life. To many, The marriage reeked of predation. Chaplin had already developed a notorious reputation for pursuing teenage girls. His previous marriages, including one to actress Lita Gray when she was just 16, had been plagued with public court battles, paternity suits, and scandal. But the union with Una struck a nerve with the American public. It wasn't just inappropriate, it was unforgivable. The press went wild. Religious and conservative groups demanded Chaplin's films be boycotted. A bitter paternity suit with another young woman, Joan Barry, was unfolding at the same time. And though Chaplin was proven not to be the father via blood test, the court still ruled him financially responsible. The verdict inflamed his critics. Then came the politics. Chaplin had always leaned left, supporting causes that drew the ire of Cold War-era conservatives. Combined with his sexual scandals, he became a lightning rod for controversy. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover labeled him a subversive. Right-wing groups picketed theaters. In 1952, Chaplin left the U.S. for the London premiere of his film Limelight. While he was overseas, the U.S. government revoked his re-entry permit. Just like that, Charlie Chaplin, once the face of American cinema, was exiled. Though he would eventually return to accept an honorary Oscar in 1972, the damage had been done. His American career was over. His name became taboo in Hollywood circles. Studios erased his influence from their public histories for decades. As for Una, she stayed with him. They remained married until his death in 1977 and had 8 children. But the marriage, however personally sincere, became the symbol of everything America came to reject about Chaplin: his sexual appetite, his politics, and his defiance of social norms. One affair didn't just ruin his image, it cast him out. Chaplin may have pioneered the American dream in film, but in the end, it was love, or something that looked like it, that turned that dream into exile. Part 14. Gloria Grahame and Nicholas Ray. The affair with her stepson that ended her career. Gloria Grahame was one of film noir's most intoxicating stars. The breathy-voiced femme fatale with sultry eyes and a streak of steel beneath her curves. She won an Oscar for The Bad and the Beautiful and lit up the screen in It's a Wonderful Life and In a Lonely Place. But off-screen, her real-life scandal would make any of her film roles seem tame by comparison. It started with director Nicholas Ray, the maverick behind Rebel Without a Cause. Grahame and Ray married in 1948. The marriage was short, volatile, and ended in divorce just a few years later. But what detonated after the divorce would go down as one of Hollywood's most chilling betrayals of trust. Years after their separation, rumors began circulating that Gloria Grahame had slept with Ray's teenage son, her own stepson, Anthony Tony Ray, while he was still in high school, and possibly while she was still married to Nicholas. Nicholas Ray himself reportedly discovered the affair the worst way imaginable, by walking in on them in bed. Hollywood was stunned, though the press initially buried the story, but the whispers wouldn't go away. In the 1960s, the unthinkable became reality. Gloria Grahame married Tony Ray. She was 36, he was 21, and she had once changed his diapers. The public was appalled. Colleagues recoiled. Studios severed ties. Her career, once red hot, collapsed almost overnight. Directors stopped calling. Casting agents avoided her name. She had gone from Oscar winner to persona non grata. The affair and subsequent marriage tainted her image beyond repair. And it wasn't just Hollywood that turned its back. Friends abandoned her. Even the press, typically lenient to old stars, treated her as a pariah. Her reputation was no longer that of a tragic beauty, but of a woman who had crossed every imaginable line. Grahame retreated into obscurity, working sporadically in theater and small films. She and Tony eventually divorced, but the stain remained. Even decades later, when a brief resurgence of interest in her work occurred, the scandal overshadowed her talent. In a rare interview, Grahame said, "You can work hard, win awards, survive studio wars, but one story, one mistake, can wipe all of that away." She died in 1981, far from the Hollywood spotlight she once dominated. And while some cinephiles remember her performances, most people remember the scandal. Gloria Grahame's affair didn't just destroy a marriage. It shattered the unspoken boundaries of Hollywood taboo, and in doing so, torched the very foundation of her career. Here is Part 15, a tale of one of Hollywood's most rugged leading men, and how his reckless lifestyle, shaped by affairs and scandal, nearly got him blacklisted, imprisoned, and erased from film history. Part 15, Robert Mitchum, the affairs and scandal that nearly sent him to prison and off the screen forever. Robert Mitchum was the original antihero. Cool, detached, and unapologetically masculine, he was the face of noir classics like Out of the Past and The Night of the Hunter. Audiences loved his brooding presence, his sleepy eyes, and that deep, gravelly voice that oozed danger. But behind the aloof charisma was a man spiraling from indulgence in women, drugs, and chaos. In the 1940s and early 50s, Mitchum's affairs were an open secret in Hollywood. Though married with children, he treated monogamy as optional. Co-stars, extras, studio secretaries, no one was off limits. And unlike others who tried to conceal their infidelities, Mitchum flaunted his. He once boasted, "The only difference between me and my fellow actors is that I've spent more time in bed with more women." But the real scandal hit in 1948. Mitchum was arrested in a late-night police raid on a Hollywood home, caught smoking marijuana with a young starlet named Lila Leeds. At the time, drug arrests were not just tabloid fodder, they were career killers. Studios had moral clauses. Advertisers panicked. Public opinion turned vicious. And this was no minor infraction. Mitchum was convicted and sentenced to 60 days in jail. For a leading man at the height of his fame, it was a catastrophe. Columnists declared his career over. Studio heads considered dropping him. And behind the scenes, producers quietly began replacing him in planned projects. But there was more to lose than just roles. The scandal brought unwanted attention to his personal life. The media began digging into his affairs. Rumors swirled that some of his lovers were underage or involved with powerful studio men. Mitchum, always sarcastic and defiant, refused to apologize. But the damage was undeniable. His wife nearly left him. His endorsements vanished. And for a time, his future in Hollywood looked doomed. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of burying Mitchum, the scandal rebranded him. He became the original bad boy, the rebel who didn't care what society thought. For younger audiences, especially in post-war America, he was suddenly more relatable than the clean-cut studio darlings. Still, the affair-laced image followed him like a shadow. Directors cast him in darker, more morally ambiguous roles, not out of creative vision, but because it fit who he had become in the public eye. Mitchum was no longer just acting tough. He was tough and dangerous, and always one step away from another scandal. Though he recovered professionally, Mitchum never truly shook the image of the womanizer, the man who treated marriage like a costume and commitment like a joke. For Robert Mitchum, the price of his lifestyle wasn't obscurity, it was typecasting. He would forever be the bad guy, the seducer, the loner. And while the world loved watching him smolder on screen, few knew just how close he came to burning it all down. Part 16, Rita Hayworth and Prince Ali Khan, the affair that made her a princess, then a pariah. Rita Hayworth was Hollywood's ultimate dream girl. With her flame-red hair, hourglass figure, and smoldering presence in films like Gilda and CoverGirl, she was both fantasy and icon, the woman every man wanted and every woman envied. But Rita was also deeply insecure, constantly seeking love and approval off-screen. And in 1948, she believed she had finally found it. Prince Ali Khan, dashing, fabulously wealthy, and heir to one of the most powerful religious dynasties in the world, swept Rita off her feet. Their affair was fast, flashy, and scandalous. Ali was still technically married when their romance began, and his reputation as a globe-trotting playboy set off alarm bells. But Rita, exhausted by Hollywood and weary of failed relationships, wanted escape. She left the studio lot behind and married Ali Khan in 1949, becoming Princess Hayworth. To the world, it was a fairy tale, but to Hollywood, it was betrayal. Columbia Pictures chief Harry Cohn, who had famously micromanaged every detail of Hayworth's career, was furious. She had walked away from a carefully controlled persona. As a Muslim prince's wife, Hayworth could no longer portray the sexually liberated women who had made her famous. The marriage demanded discretion, modesty, and diplomacy, none of which aligned with her film identity. The studios dropped her. Public interest shifted. Some American audiences viewed her as disloyal, not just for marrying a foreigner, but for converting to Islam and living abroad. Fan clubs dissolved. casting directors moved on to safer, more accessible starlets. Within a year, the studios that once adored her had closed their doors. But the worst was yet to come. Ali Khan soon resumed his philandering ways, openly cheating on Hayworth at high society events. She was humiliated on the world stage. Their daughter, Princess Yasmin, was born in 1949, but the marriage had already begun to unravel. By 1951, Hayworth filed for divorce and returned to the U.S. She thought she could reclaim her throne in Hollywood. But Hollywood had moved on. She was now seen as damaged goods, too exotic, too unpredictable, too scandal-laden. Roles became rare. Her return film, Affair in Trinidad, did decent business, but the magic was gone. Her subsequent movies flopped, and her personal troubles, alcohol, custody battles, and failed relationships became tabloid fodder. Worse, the very industry that once worshipped her now whispered behind her back. She gave it all up for a title. And look how that turned out. For Rita Hayworth, the affair with Prince Ali Khan didn't just cost her a marriage. It cost her her place in Hollywood history. She became a symbol not of enduring glamour, but of tragic exile, a star who had it all, gave it away for love, and was punished for it every day thereafter. Part Teen, Veronica Lake, the affairs and feuds that left her forgotten and penniless. In the early 1940s, Veronica Lake was everywhere. With her iconic peekaboo hairstyle cascading over one eye, she became a cultural sensation, seductive, mysterious, and endlessly imitated. Paired with Alan Ladd in noir classics like This Gun for Hire and The Blue Dahlia, she was the femme fatale of wartime America. But beneath the camera-ready allure was a woman battling demons and sabotaging her career from within. Lake's personal life was a minefield of feuds, emotional instability, and ill-advised affairs. Though married multiple times, fidelity was never her strong suit, nor was diplomacy. She clashed with directors, insulted co-stars, and refused to play Hollywood's game. Her most damaging affair wasn't with one person, it was with her own ego. She had affairs with producers and fellow actors, often leveraging her beauty to gain influence, and then burning those bridges once she got what she wanted. Rumors swirled about trysts with married men on set, including high-profile names that studios worked hard to keep buried. One affair, with a married executive, allegedly derailed negotiations that could have landed her a major role in To Have and Have Not, a part that instead launched Lauren Bacall's career. But Veronica's self-destruction didn't stop at love. She drank heavily, sometimes arriving on set intoxicated or failing to show up at all. Her unpredictable behavior made her radioactive in the industry. By 1948, Paramount quietly let her contract lapse. She was just 26. The industry she once ruled turned its back without fanfare. By the 1950s, Lake was all but forgotten. The once iconic starlet took bit parts in B-movies and worked odd jobs to survive, including bartending under a pseudonym in New York. Patrons who recognized her were stunned. One famously asked, "Aren't you Veronica Lake?" She replied, "I used to be." Her final years were spent in near poverty, estranged from her children and bitter toward Hollywood. "They used me and tossed me aside," she said in a rare late-life interview. But others pointed to a harder truth. Lake sabotaged herself. Her string of affairs, explosive temper, and unwillingness to adapt had alienated the very people who once championed her. In an industry built on perception, she had become her own worst publicist. Veronica Lake died in 1973 at age 50, virtually penniless and alone. No red carpet tribute, no legacy ceremony, just silence, as if Hollywood had collectively decided she was too much trouble to remember. Her story serves as the final echo in this series of cautionary tales, that in the golden age, fame was fragile, love was dangerous, and for women, one wrong move, or one too many, could erase them forever.